Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. 8:32 exactly here on News and Views on Salam Media. And next we're going to a very, very big story. It is resonating all around the world. And that is a visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan. China has branded a landmark visit while she was there yesterday to visit Taiwan by Nancy Pelosi, who is the US Speaker. China is saying that this is extremely dangerous. It accuses Nancy Pelosi, the most senior US politician in 25 years, to visit the island China claims as its own. And they suggesting that the US is playing with fire. They go on to say that is Beijing. Those who play with fire will perish by it. So let's talk with senior researcher at AFRASID, Thembisa Fakude, who's also a regular on the show, giving us input on political issues from around the world. And let's hear his thoughts. Assalamu alaikum to you. Welcome to the program.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That's quite a serious statement that the US is playing with fire by this visit of Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, who China claims is part of their territory.
Yeah, well, it's going to be very difficult, or it would have been very difficult for Joe Biden to have stopped Nancy Pelosi because, as you know, the political infrastructure in the States doesn't operate like it does in South Africa. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is totally independent. In other words, the Congress is totally independent from the executive. And this has happened in the past before. If you remember that the representative from the Republican Party with the funny name Newt Gingrich in 1997 visited Taiwan, which also caused a problem. And at the time, the government, which was led by the Democrats, argued that they can't stop a member of a Republican Party who wants to visit Taiwan. And that's what they're saying this time around, that they can't stop Nancy Pelosi because Nancy Pelosi is an independent leader of the House, and she doesn't get instructions from the executive. So it's her prerogative to do as she pleases. But of course, what had complicated the issue is that she's using a military airline, which is complicating the matter. The Chinese feel that Biden knows exactly what they're doing, and they're just trying to push the limits in Taiwan.
I'm just wondering if the US is not using this as a loophole, suggesting that she makes her own decisions and she's pretty independent of the Congress, and they can't dictate to her. It doesn't
Well,
make
that's
sense.
what they're doing.
It doesn't make
That's
sense.
what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what they're
So
saying, and then as a result, that's why she went to Taiwan.
How seriously do we take Beijing's threats? I understand that there's already been aircraft hovering around strategic areas outside of Taiwan. They are Chinese aircraft, obviously. They are in international space, airspace, but they're hovering around that area. What do we make of that action by China?
Well, it's a dangerous action, but it also means that it will invite the presence of the military hardware belonging to the United States, which is what exactly they want. My view is that the US is doing exactly what they did in Ukraine, where they provoked, in inverted commas, Putin, and Putin fell for the bait, thinking that he was going to push back the Ukrainians. But now the Western world, including the US, know exactly the type of reaction that can be expected from Russia in the future. I mean, Russia failed to do anything significant in the past 6 months except annexing Donbas, which was already full of pro-Russian Ukrainians, if you remember. So this again is all about trying to test China's resolve. To what extent will they react, and if they do react, what sort of reaction will that be? Because very few people in the world have ever seen China in action, and I think the Americans are itching to see an agitated China resorting into war, which is something that will help them prepare better, because the moment they don't know what sort of military hardware China has. And the reason why China is dangerous is because of the perception that it can impact or infect harm if it was to be taken on in a war. But until you actually try them out and see how far they can go and how they can react, it's really difficult for you to ascertain precisely what sort of a kettle fish you're dealing with.
Okay. We're also, I'm wondering how much of this has to do with the arms trade, the arms that Taiwan purchases from the United States. Is it a significant amount for Pelosi to be making this visit to them and further strengthening those trade deals?
Well, Taiwan is also now beginning to be known as the United States province, because United States basically supply the military hardware and armory to Taiwan because of the Chinese threat. So you are correct. It's also part of it. But most importantly, if you remember, Taiwan is one of the largest producers of chips that we use
In
for
computers.
telephones and computers and all of that.
Mm,
And that
mm.
type of technology is very important to the United States, and they will never allow China to reincorporate Taiwan into the mainland, because they understand the importance and the significance of this. And if it was to be the case, chances are China will inherit technology, and that could be in reverse used against the United States. So the United States will do whatever it takes to make sure that Taiwan remains what it is. Even though, of course, yesterday John Kirby, who used to be the spokesperson at the Pentagon, who's since moved to the White House, has said that the United States is not interested in an independent Taiwan. In other words, they still stick to the one China policy. But what we saw with Nancy Pelosi contradicts that statement, which has also been repeated by Joe Biden.
Okay, have a couple of messages here, and I'd like you to respond to it. And I think you have already alluded to this point, which reads: Pelosi must never be underestimated. Her role is more powerful than Biden. She has the backing from those who run America.
Oh, yes. She's the third most powerful person in the United States. If the president and the deputy disappear from the political scene, she will be the one in charge. But again, her personally, she's a very strong woman. This time around, she grabbed the bulls by the horn and went against the tide. She's the only one who could tackle Trump. So, notwithstanding, and I know it's always easy for us to think that there's always strong men behind a strong woman. I think she's, in her own right, a very strong, tough woman. The fact that she risked it all, notwithstanding what China said, tells you what type of a person she is. She's always stood for human rights, and she's always stood for the minority rights of many other people around the world. And by the way, China shouldn't, or the world shouldn't allow China to dictate who travels to where. I mean, we know that at the moment they are suppressing Muslims, the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, for example. We saw what happened in Hong Kong. You know what had happened in Tibet when they pressured South Africa in 2014 from visiting Dalai Lama from visiting South Africa to attend Bishop Tutu celebrations. So we can't allow that. It's a very wrong precedent. And I think, to an extent, for the first time, I actually do support Nancy Pelosi, because if China really does go ahead with this, you are likely to find those people who are activists from all of these territories I've just mentioned struggling to go out, visiting any other country. And if that does happen, imagine what will happen to the client states in Africa, who also might want to have, say, for example, a Dalai Lama or activists from Xinjiang, the Uyghur Muslims want to visit African countries. Chances are you're going to have China putting pressure on those countries, and those countries will not allow the movement of those people. So the precedent that's set here is very important, and it pushes back these negative or adverse Chinese political intentions of suppressing the global freedom of movements.
Okay, before I let you go, one important question and a statement from a comment from from a group here as well. Let's assume that Pelosi, let's just assume that she had backed down and not visited Taiwan. What sort of message would that have sent to the rest of the world? And what would China then have read into that action of hers had that been the scenario that had played out?
It would have been a very bad political precedent. As I've said, they did the same to us, South Africa, in the past when they
Mm.
pressured the Zuma government not to issue a traveling visa to the Dalai Lama because they simply did not agree with Dalai Lama's politics. So if they had succeeded this time around, imagine what else would have happened for those people who come from the territories such as Tibet, Hong Kong, or Xinjiang who wanted to visit other countries in the world. It would have been up to China to decide whether they are allowed to go to those countries or not. So it would have been a very bad precedent. And I'm glad that Nancy Pelosi went ahead, notwithstanding the dangers that were surrounded in the rhetoric that came from Xi Jinping. We can't allow one country determining who goes where at what time. And so it would have been a bad precedent, particularly, as I've said, to the client African states in Africa who largely depend on China for their survival. It would have meant that China would have henceforth dictated to them whether to receive the dissidents who have been coming from those territories or not. So it's to an extent this has highlighted a very important fact when it comes to China freedoms and the proliferation of democracy.
However, that doesn't leave America looking squeaky clean, because they too have a hidden agenda here, or possibly a wide open agenda. And it's really in America's own interest for this trip to have gone ahead. You will comment on that comment of mine together with this read from a listener. America's support of Ukraine is part of what provoked Putin to invade, but then they refused to directly intervene. The last 160 days have made the world a less safe place, increased inflation dramatically, increased fuel and food prices, and decreased food security for the entire world. Now, Pelosi is in Taiwan, provoking China. What will the US do if China acts on this provocation? How has Pelosi's meaningless trip made the world safer or better? America, you need to hear this. You're not making the world a better place by being in it. Thembisa.
Yeah, well, again, I mean, people tend to, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. If you really think of what China has been doing around the world, and if you really think of what China has done in Hong Kong in terms of suppressing the freedom movements in that part of the democratic movement in that part of the world, we should be concerned. I know that
Okay.
of what they've, I mean, we're against them because of what they've been doing to the Muslim world. But actually, China is much more destructive to Muslim worlds than the US. If you really think about it, contemporary. If you talk about now, I mean, we know that the USA is involved, and we know the stories of how the US has destroyed the Middle East and the Muslim world. But let us talk about now. Imagine of this precedence. If it had to be repeated, as I've said, Dalai Lama, if you remember, all of us were upset, was prevented from coming to South Africa because of China's pressure. Now you have another situation where um, uh, I understand that as a senior American, U.S. American politician, but imagine if any of us who have offended China in one way or the other was also prevented from traveling to Taiwan, Hong Kong, simply because of our political beliefs. For me, it's the principle. We should encourage, whether we disagree or like or hate, if people wish to travel and their politics are against us, we must actually give them the right to say so, and the right for them to exercise those freedoms instead of us suppressing them and influencing countries and putting pressure on them not to allow those people to travel. So I'm totally in support of the democratic right of movement of Nancy Pelosi. I don't agree with the politics, but I do agree with the example that she's setting at the moment, that of pushing back China's sunnah with that they're trying to establish around the world, that if we don't agree with you, we'll tell you where to go and not where to go.
And that's where we leave it. Thembisa Fakude, the senior researcher at AFRASID, talking to us about Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and the threats that has been
The sound
made
is
not
gone.
only to her but around the world.
I
Okay,
can't hear you no
can you
more.
hear? Can you hear me now? Well, I think let's end the interview. I apologize, but thank you for your thoughts and your insights on this matter. Assalamu alaikum to you.